And now I'm talking to Hans Zomer, the director of Dóchas. Hans, how's it going? Hans, I spoke to you a couple of months ago talking about the replacement, the process of getting to the replacement to the Millennium Development Goals in 2015. But if we can just focus today on the actual Millennium Development Goals, and maybe at the end of the interview we can talk a bit about the process of the replacement to them. But there was a big summit of the UN. There was a summit of the UN last week on the MDGs, wasn't there? And there was also another meeting. Could you tell us a bit about them, please?
Yeah, last week in New York we had a number of high-level meetings, but the most important one was the one about the Millennium Development Goals. So this was 13 years after the Millennium Development Goals had been agreed and less than 2 years before they were to be achieved. So this was the last moment where the world community could take stock of progress and to see, are we on track to the achievement of the goals, and to start thinking about, as you say, what should replace them after 2015.
Could you tell us what was agreed or talked about at the meeting at Zomer, please?
Well, the main business of the event last week at the UN was really to take stock of the progress so far. So world leaders visited the Millennium Development Goals, looked at all the indicators and concluded that yes, these goals are working, progress is being made, but there is an unevenness in the progress. Some goals have already been achieved ahead of deadline and others we are behind schedule. So the real important outcome of the summit was that basically the international community, the members of the United Nations, recommitted themselves to their achievement and basically told each other, we must not let up. We must continue to do more so that we will achieve the current set of goals. The second important outcome of the summit last week was that they formally agreed that in 2015 they will meet again in New York to agree a new set of goals. And this new set of goals is meant to build on the current strength of the MDGs, but also fill in some of the blanks or some of the areas where the MDGs are weak. And that's particularly around inequality, gender inequality, and the references to human rights.
And could you tell us what MDGs have been achieved, and just give us a quick summary on what's been achieved, basically?
Well, the one that stands out for me is the education goal. In that goal, we set out to bring parity in the number of girls and boys in schools, so have as many girls enrolled in schools as boys around the world, and that has been achieved. So this is a really phenomenal achievement. And the other one in the education goal is that now worldwide 9 out of 10 children of primary school age are starting primary school. So now obviously there are issues about how many kids complete their primary school, but obviously if they don't start they won't be able to complete. So there's still 57 million kids around the world that are not in school, but we have managed to bring that number down from well over 100 million to 57 million. So we're definitely on track on the education goal. Another goal is around drinking water, safe drinking water for people in urban slums around the world. And we have brought safe drinking water to 89% of the world's population now. So that's a major achievement. That is ahead of schedule as well. The first goal is the one about reducing global hunger, extreme poverty. And there again, we have achieved the numbers game, if you will. We have halved the number of people living in extreme poverty. But we look today or this week that at the UN, we all ended up concluding again that at a global level we've achieved this goal, but there are enormous gaps in that. Most of the progress has been made in countries like India and China, whereas in sub-Saharan Africa, we are lagging behind in the goal of reducing extreme poverty. So those are the key outcomes, I think, from the MDG summit last week.
And if we just ask you a couple of questions, you mightn't have what's called Dóchas mightn't have official policies on them, but why is it that 57 million kids still out of school? Are most of these kids in rural areas or urban areas or both? Do you know, or what? Why is there? I know there's been a great reduction, but how is there? The population of Ireland is 4.4 million, and if you multiply that by where are all these kids?
Well, a lot of the issues are in rural countries, particularly when it comes to girls. There's countries like Afghanistan and other countries where traditional beliefs are not prioritizing the education of girls. But in many rural communities, schools are still quite far away. There are also quite a lot of issues of kids who start school but then are taken out of school. Girls, when they reach puberty, or boys when the family decide that they want them to, bring in an income, because it costs money to send children to school. So where we've seen the greatest progress is in countries where school attendance has been subsidized in effect by, for instance, providing school meals, or by not charging school fees. Those measures, which cost money, but they have made a massive difference in the numbers of kids who go to school. Because essentially in most countries the picture is the same. It's rural and poor communities that are not able to send their children to school.
And how true is it, in your personal opinion, that, like, I've heard a lot of talk in the last couple of years about the rise of the African middle class, but like is it true that the middle class in Africa, what's called the middle class in Africa, most of these people aren't like the middle class in Ireland? Like, they're still very poor. Like,
absolutely, this is a relative term. Yeah. It's middle class lives is what is the expression that people use, which basically means that people have a salaried job. They have a house that they either own or rent. They may have some of the trappings of life as we know it in the West, but it's definitely not the same lifestyle as that we're living. But middle class lives, yes, 1 in 3 people in sub-Saharan Africa can now be described as having a middle class life. Now that means that they have an income of $20 or so. It's not per week. It's not the sort of income that you and I are used to. But I think the important part is that to say, that clearly there is a rising middle class. And in countries like in Northern Africa, like in Brazil, you've seen what that leads to in terms of there's young people are now well educated. They have expectations of jobs, and in many ways the problem is now to provide the jobs for those millions of young people that are coming out of the education system, that have all the qualifications, that have all the skills, and that are not now able to find jobs in their own countries.
Yeah, and the biggest reason why there's been a huge reduction in poverty in Brazil is in the last decade or few years there was some kind, I don't know what the term is, some kind of a welfare system brought in, isn't there? And could you tell us a bit, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that's the Bolsa Familia that you're referring to. I think Brazil is an interesting example, and there's other countries around the world that essentially have gone against the advice by the IMF and the World Bank, who have tended to tell poor countries that to get out of poverty they just need to sell products cheaply to the rich West. And Brazil and Indonesia and Bangladesh are countries that have said, no, we actually want to see our development come from within. So we want to support poor people so that they can rise into this middle class, so that they have disposable income to start spending on produce from our own countries. So yeah, as you say, in Brazil, basically what happened there was that poor families were given an unemployment benefit or support, financial support, that allowed them to, not be starving, and to create space for them to go to school, their kids to go to school, and basically start becoming consumers in the Brazilian economy, and that drove a massive economic growth in the country. So we are saying that, and this is relevant, I guess, for people listening in Ireland, that austerity, which is really was the recipe presented to Brazil and other countries by the IMF and the World Bank, tends to drive the further austerity, if you will, rather when these countries have said, no, we invest deliberately in policies and in funding, for poor families in order to bring them up to a level where they can be, a regular part of society.
And it's brilliant, isn't it? The Indian government are planning to do the same thing, aren't they? And do you think that's actually going to happen?
Yeah, it's amazing in India that you now have, like we have in Ireland, we have a right to unemployment benefit. You have that now in India. Now, there's issues with that in that, like here in Ireland, you need to have an address. And quite a lot of rural people don't have an address. They don't have a bank account. Because in order to avoid corruption entering into it, the Indian government have decided that they'll pay you the unemployment benefit straight into your bank account without some sort of middleman. But yeah, lots of rural people don't have access to bank accounts, for instance. Now, so that's an issue that we need to work on. We're helping NGOs around the world are helping people get birth certificates, because that's, again, if you walk into a bank, you need to have proof of identity. If you don't have a passport or a birth certificate, you can't open a bank account. If you don't have an address, you can't open a bank account. So we're supporting those institutions that are delivering those papers, if you will, for poor people, so that they can access this social benefit scheme that does exist.
And I interviewed Sorka and Nick Fahuna from Oxfam yesterday, and they launched a report there a couple of weeks ago. It's looking about austerity in Europe, and that's the first time that Oxfam, she told me, have commented officially on poverty in Europe, within Europe. Do you think that's a good move, by them, to be commenting instead of just commenting on developing countries?
Well, in a way, it's a return for Oxfam to its beginnings, because Oxfam started out as a relief organization for refugees and poor people in Europe, and I think it's really to be welcomed, because I think Oxfam has experience overseas, and it has experience with the structural adjustment and the austerity programs that were imposed on countries in Latin America and in sub-Saharan Africa in the 1980s and 1990s. So they are saying, look, we've seen what these policies are doing for poor people, or against poor people, if you will, and we are now therefore seeing them being applied in Europe and the same mistakes being made. So I think it is right that an organization like Oxfam came out and says, please learn from the experiences elsewhere and don't make the same mistake here in Europe.
But just to play devil's advocate, the government in Ireland would say, they've no alternative. Is there an alternative to austerity in Ireland anyway?
There's always alternatives. I guess what we're learning in the development world is that there are choices to be made, and they are not easy choices. But they boil down to what development model do you have. And I think in many European countries at the moment, the dominant thinking tends to be what we call the trickle-down process. So if you've got economy doing well at the top, that it will spill over to the lower and the poorer sections of society. And what we are saying is that we have seen in our work as development agencies that isn't actually happening. That and the key examples that we have of where economies have grown is those examples like Indonesia, like Brazil, etc., where the government deliberately chose a different strategy. Now, I'm not saying that all these policies can easily be copied here. And it gets more complicated, but really what we are saying is that we as development NGOs, our job is to work with poor and marginalized communities and to help them defend themselves, if you will, and organize themselves so that they can claim their rights and make sure that they are being included in the decision making. So really, if you want to transfer that experience, then we are saying, well, the government of any country needs to listen to its citizens, and needs to respond to the real and genuine concerns of poor people, not just to the captains of industry.
I think if that was going to happen, it'll have to happen well in Ireland, it will have to happen within Europe and with America as well. Because say I think if Ireland were to change their policy on austerity and all, you could have a flight of capital from Ireland, but if it was done on an EU basis and in conjunction with the US, so if it was worked on a broad basis, it could work.
Yeah, in short, what we have always been saying is that these are economic decisions, and over the last since the 1980s, 1990s, we've seen an amount of deregulation and I guess a trust in the market as the regulating factor. And we are saying, as development organizations, we've seen the limits of that model, and we know that we need political stewardship or political management of the market, and we need regulation, and we need that at local level, we need that at the international level, and the power we've seen with the collapse of the banks, what the enormous power of rating agencies is, and creditors. So I guess what we are saying is that we need to strengthen our political international collaboration within the EU and at UN level to balance to manage the globalized forces of the economy and of the market. And deregulation is not the only answer.
Yeah, okay. We finish up now in a minute, Hans. Just to talk, it's great talking about all these different things, countries, Indonesia and Brazil and all, and politics and all. But just going back to Millennium Development Goals for a minute. Like, we have another less than 1,000 days, I think, before it'll be 2015 and the end of Millennium Development Goals, and we have the new development goals. Is there going to be an increased level of work and, of course, finance to achieve the Millennium Development Goals? Is there going to be a big push, like, do you know?
Well, the big experience we have from the MDGs is, in fact, that why they have worked is that the governments of developing countries have started to invest in their own development processes. So obviously, as Western nations, we have promised to help achieve the goals by delivering on our aid promises, and by redressing the unfair trade rules that exist in the international sphere. But really, where, for instance, the HIV and AIDS goal is on track, is that most of the funding for HIV AIDS work now comes from the health budget of developing countries. So our emphasis in the post-2015 goals is not so much on aid money or on funding, but really it's about this mutual accountability. What do we, if this is a contract that all the nations on earth are signing with each other, then we are all responsible for its achievement. And we are saying that the MDGs can be strengthened in the next framework by having clearer lines of accountability of who's responsible for what. If they remain general promises, like in the MDG 8, which tends to be quite vague and is the only goal that doesn't actually have set targets. And it's aid and trade and debt. And so goal 8. Yeah. So that goal, apart from the 0.7, it doesn't actually have any targets that you could measure against. So we are saying the next framework should be very clear about the accountability and the responsibility of achievement or non-achievement of each of the goals.
And just I need to finish up now in a minute or two. But Britain gave £1 billion last week at the UN summit or around then towards the global fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria, didn't they? And they're the only country that has. Or make me wrong, they're one of the only countries that have met the commitment to spend 0.7% of GNP on aid, aren't they?
Yeah, we are saying, therefore, Ireland entered into this contract of the Millennium Development Goals, and our contribution was going to be on the 0.7 and on global trade, and we haven't met our own promise. So that is important. But we are also saying that it's about being clear what contribution we are going to be making, because it was too easy for countries to say, well, we're responsible for all of them, and if there's no clear assigned responsibility, then things tend to fall behind.
Okay, last question. Just to finish up, if people want to find out more about the Millennium Development Goals and the work going on to achieve them, and of course the replacement to the Millennium Development Goals, and this whole huge work and process that's going on now, what would you recommend the best places to find out would be?
Well, obviously, I'd say that the Dóchas website is a good place to start. We have a resources section there, also on Dóchas.ie. We also have a new news service, which is called The World's Best News. And that's one where we hope to provide sort of interesting and stimulating news, uplifting stories of hope and of change in relation to the MDGs and in relation to global development, because we're finding it hard to get our stories across, because a lot of the reporting on the achievement of the MDGs is about numbers and percentages and euros or dollars, and they don't really make the stories come alive. So with the world's best news, we're hoping to bring some of those realities closer to home and make it easier for people to identify with the really phenomenal progress that we're making towards the world's goals. So at the moment it's a Facebook page. So if you go onto facebook.com/the world's best news, you can sign up to receiving updates every 2 or 3 days. They're short and snappy, but they really give you a flavor of the realities that is behind some of the more inaccessible UN documents about the progress towards the MDGs.
Okay, Hans, thanks very much. And I'll talk to you again soon whenever there's other big news with the whole process,